Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Welcome back to another episode of the Chad Smith Podcast. My name is Chad Smith, and today is Thursday, December 22nd, 2022. I'm joined, as always, by my two co-hosts from California. Please welcome back to the show, Mr. Sonny Conway and Spooky Morales.
Good morning, y'all.
Morning, guys.
Good morning.
Hello, boys. Hello, everyone in chat.
Hello, everybody in chat. We got 3 days till Christmas, and we've got a snow blizzard on the way here in Michigan. So everybody batten down the hatches. We're going to be getting some weather. Probably not for you guys, but
What is that batten down the hatches? I've heard that, my whole life, and I never really knew what it means.
Isn't that a ship reference?
Yep.
Batten down
Hatches on the ship.
Close
Get
the
up there and
windows,
batten
be ready
down the
for
hatches,
storm.
boys. Got storms rolling in. So, guys, we are only on for an hour, and we have an awesome guest backstage, so I don't want to keep her waiting. We've got Lynn Monet. She is a world-renowned author of Omnipresent, What Happens Next, and the soon-to-be-released Colors of Heaven Beginnings Never End. Lynn is a paranormal consultant and lecturer specializing in hauntings and afterlife. I cannot read this morning. She is an empath with the ability to see frequencies interdimensionally most cannot. She has been a nurse for over 20 years, most of which has been in end-of-life care, management, and geriatrics. So, to talk about a couple more of her books that she's got and that book, Omnipresent, please welcome for the first time, Miss Lin Monet.
Hi, everybody.
Good morning, Lynn.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excited to have you. Thanks for coming on with us.
That's wonderful.
Okay, so your first, you said you have Omnipresent is out right now, but you have two other books that are available, or they will be available?
They are available. They're currently available. I have Omnipresent. Then there's Omnipresent, What Happened Next. And my new release is Colors of Heaven, Beginnings Never End. That was just released 2 weeks ago. So they're all available on my website, www.linmonet.com. Don't forget to give a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, so do not go to there's an Amazon link earlier that I posted in the chat, so if you could just go to her website instead, linmonet.com, and then I put it in the chat room right there, /shop. You can access her books there. So the first book that you have out right now is Omnipresent.
Yes.
If you could just go into a little bit about what that book is about.
Okay, just a little bit of background on me. I actually grew up in a haunted house. When I was 5 years old and my brother was 7, I had something very profound happen. We actually lived 3 short blocks behind a hospital that was connected with a nursing home. So we had people in patient's gowns walking through our house that my siblings and I would see. And there was this one instance where my brother and I were in the master bedroom of my parents' bedroom, and I was in my mother's jewelry box decorating myself, as the little girls do. And my brother was playing with his Hot Wheels on the floor, and the corner of the room started to mist. And I turned to show my brother how glamorous I had made myself, and he was like fixated on that corner. And in that corner, his best friend John stepped in, and then his mother, father, and brother stepped in right behind him, and they were standing there smiling at us. So my brother runs out of the room at the same time I do. We go in opposite directions looking for my mom. And my brother finds my mom first, and he tells her, he says, Mom, John's here and his family. And my mom's like, well, I didn't even hear anybody knock. And he says, and they're in your bedroom. And she says, they're in my bedroom. Who let them in my bedroom? And of course, when they got there was nothing there. So my brother got in trouble for that because, of course, back in the 60s, you didn't want kids to have those sorts of gifts because you'd be labeled the nutty people, and you'd literally have men in white coats at your door. So the very next day was the first day after spring break, and my brother went to school and John was not on the bus. And then he got to class and John sat right next to him and John was not in class. And after they said the Pledge of Allegiance, the teacher stood up and said that John would not be returning to school because he and his entire family perished in an auto accident on the way home from somewhere in Florida, Disney World or Busch Gardens or something. And it happened that day that we saw the misting in the corner. So it was John coming to say goodbye. And I can remember that like it was yesterday. So I've had the ability. I went when I was about 10 years old. I was born and raised Presbyterian. My mom took a jaunt with the Jehovah's Witnesses, which was a book in itself, and we won't go there. But at 10 years old, I was still seeing things. And my mother took me in front of the elders, which is equivalent to the minister or pastor of the church. And I'm this 10-year-old sitting in this room with all of these men staring at me, telling me that I'm possessed, that what I'm seeing is demons, even if it's like my grandmother, my great-grandmother at that point, something comforting, and that there was something wrong with me. So I became afraid of my gifts. And when I would see things, I would run out of the room just as fast as anybody else, thinking that it was a demon. So as coming forward as a single mother, I was looking for a house, and in my price range, which is where the book Omnipresent comes in. I had 2 children at the time. My children, Austin and Brittany, are the actual names of my kids in the book. I had been looking for a year for a house, and this house finally came on the market. My realtor calls me and she said, this house, my colleague just came back from taking pictures of, it's not even listed on the MLS. You know, we need to go, this is in your price range and it's almost too good to be true. Well, of course, the too good to be true was really true. It was too good to be true. And it should have resonated with me, but it didn't. So we, of course, get in the car and we're driving there. And I'm asking her, I said, could you check with your colleague and make sure that the price of this house is right? Because this house, 2,400 square feet, brick house on a almost half-acre lot, Florida flat lot. Good luck finding one of those in North Carolina because it was in East Flat Rock, North Carolina. And it had double entry doors, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. I mean, it was a really nice house. And so after a couple of phone calls back to her colleague, it turned out, that yes, it was the price. And I'm like, well, what is it? Is there a dump at the end of the street or, some stinky paper mill? There's got to be something wrong with it. And it was none of those things. It was a beautiful house on a dead end street, low taxes, great schools. The house was built in the 1970s. And something that I've learned in this process is that it's not about the age of the house. A brand new house can be haunted if it's built in the wrong place. So it's about the ground that it's built on. So, and that was something interesting that I learned. So to go ahead and to go forward a little bit with that, I asked the realtor if we could come back to the house with my children that afternoon. I wanted to make an offer on it. So many other times I'd waited a day or two to make an offer, and when I'd go back, it would be gone. And so she met me back there with my kids. My kids are running through the house, picking out their bedrooms and, happy with it. And then they asked if they could go down to the lower level. And the house was a split level house. So you would come in on a foyer. There were stairs that went up and stairs that went down on the foyer. So I said, of course, you can go look down. And my daughter, she was 13 at the time. She was back up within 5 minutes. And she said, Mommy, I do not want to live here. I do not want to move in this house. And of course, I should have listened, but I didn't. And I was embarrassed because here I am standing next to this realtor that's been dragging me around for a year trying to find a house. And here's my teenager, saying that she doesn't want to move here. And I just figured that, maybe it was because she realized she was moving from her kid, away from her friends or something like that. So I asked her again, I said, what did you say? And she said, there is something about this house that I do not like, and I do not want to move here. Well, I basically told her that it wasn't her decision to make. I mean, we had been living in a home, in actually a single wide mobile home out of necessity. I was recovering financially from a devastating divorce and trying to rebuild my credit. And I'm like, how could you not want to live in this house? Where we're living could fit in here 4 times if you stack it on itself. So I ended up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I might have missed it. Did you say how old she was at the time?
13.
Oh, 13. Okay. Yeah,
she was 13. My son was 7. So when so I went ahead and I said a prayer and made a bid. And, if it's meant to be mine, it's meant to be mine. And lo and behold, I got the news the next day that that the bid was accepted. And some odd things, some odd things happen. And I'm going to go ahead and move up on this one because I want to talk a little bit more about my new book on the end. But there were so many things that happened in this house that I was never able to move in. I spent 2 nights there and sold it. I would not move my kids in there. I had multiple denominations of religion in there. I had Father Andrew Calder in there, which is known amongst the paranormal community, has since passed away, at the house to bless it. And everything kind of started. I mean, there were little things in the beginning, like the first day that we went over. I was pulling up carpeting, trying to save money as a single mom so I could invest that money on a better grade of wooden flooring. And so I'm cooking tacos, and my daughter comes in and peers in from the kitchen doorway, and she said, "What did you want?" And I said, I didn't call you. And she said, "Yes, you did. You called me twice. I told you that I was coming in between." And I said, "Well, I heard you say that, but I thought you were talking to your brother." And then he comes and he's peering in under her arm, and he says, "I heard you call her too." So these things had an intelligence about them. There ended up being 2 demons and a young man that had hung himself in the house, which was verified by the next door neighbor that did in fact happen with the very first family that actually built the house. The son, during their divorce, hung himself in that stairwell, and the mom came home and found him.
Oh,
So,
man.
yeah, so there were 2. Yes, it is. And so, so they do have an intelligence about them. So they learned that I was the mommy lady, that Brittany was my daughter's name in Austin, because I told them too, I was trying to rationalize. I'm like, you know what, Brittany's a common name, and maybe what you heard is some other mom out front calling her Brittany home for dinner, it's supper time. So, that we kind of played it off, and there were things that happened that I kept ignoring, and my kids were seeing things. But things really, really amped up when we spent the first night there. My daughter had a friend to come with her that was also named Brittany. And she was up at 2:00 in the morning and wanted to go home. How many 13-year-olds at a sleepover, want to go home? So we ended up calling her parents, but something frightened her so badly when she went into the kitchen to get Oreos that she wouldn't even let my daughter out of her sight, and she insisted on having her even go into the bathroom with her and everything. She wouldn't, she didn't want to be alone in the house. So I ended up taking her where she needed to go first thing in the morning. But the second night that we spent was when the activity really started to amp up. I went to take my dog, and my dog would not go into the front door, kept balking. I mean, to the point that the collar came off over her head. Oh, wow. So I had to end up carrying her into the house. And what had happened there, and again, so much more had happened, lights turning on and off, water turning on and off, all kinds of things that were happening all along up to this point. And the second night that we spent the night, I had brought blow-up mattresses. I had bought the house in March, and I wasn't going to move into it until the summer months. I was going to have the renovations done and let my kids finish in their schools that they were in without having to move papers, because they only had 8 weeks of school left. So I had blow-up mattresses there, and my kids had drugged them into the master bedroom. And I'm like, I have so many rooms started in this house and nothing's finished. I want to go ahead and finish one room. So I went ahead and I finished the bathroom. And that was the first night after I came out of the kitchen cleaning the brushes, that I saw the demon, one of them, myself, swiftly coming up the stairs, crossing the double entry doors, and I froze. And again, I'm trying to rationalize what I was seeing because I had never seen anything so horrific. And it shot down the hallway towards the master bedroom, and I heard my dog growling. So I go down to see what she's growling at, and she is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And so this was the first time that you've been to the house that you've seen something other than.
That I had seen something, but my kids and the dog were seeing it all along.
Right.
So, and the description of it is in the book. The second demon comes in later. And of course, the young man I did see hanging in the stairwell in my peripheral vision when I first went in the house. But I'm kind of going forward with some of the stuff. I couldn't keep workers in the house. I had 4 different sets of workers in the house. They would all leave by 12 o'clock, except the last one who was stoned all the time. So, and he was, they had a buddy with him because he already had his own demons with him. So, and he did good work, and I didn't care as long as he, didn't do it around my kids. But what had happened then is that I've got to find out from one of the workers what actually happened in the house and the reason why the men weren't staying. Because, I had one guy leave his DeWalt tools, and he never even came back to get paid. So, I wanted to know what was happening in the house. So I did get to find out, and this is a little spoiler alert. The third guy that came was a cousin of my coworker. And I asked her, I said, would you please ask Bobby why he didn't, return? I have a feeling it's something to do with paranormal because, of course, things were amping up at that time. I was no longer taking my children there. I will go back to the night that we spent there, and I saw that demon. My son did wake up with bite marks on his legs in 3 places. They were purple. You could count the teeth on them, and it wasn't from my dog. My dog, the bite would have been much bigger, and it was bigger than a rat would have left. So anyway, the worker, I was there in the hallway painting. He was on the other side of my son's room putting in wooden flooring. And I see out of my peripheral vision this young man coming up the stairs to the main level. And he had on a white Oxford shirt, jeans, loafers, kind of 80s style, hair parted down the middle, feathered back. And he had a very ruddy complexion, or red ness to his face. And he was so real to me that I turned, and I thought it was some disoriented person walking in the house, or maybe he knocked and I didn't hear him. So I turned and I said, "Did you knock?" And when I turned to look to see, there was nobody there. And I'm like, okay, all right, we have a ghost in the house. That's who's been turning on and off the lights. That's who's been turning on and off the water and moving things and slamming things. So I figured, that a blessing on the house would work to get that, rectify that situation. And of course, at this point, I had already signed on the dotted line. It's not like you can take the mortgage back to the bank and say, "Here, your house is haunted. I want my money back." I was stuck with the house. So when Bobby left that day, he left in a panic. And I had finally got a hold of him, and he said that he didn't want to come back and do work unless I was there. So I found out from his cousin at work what exactly happened. It was on a 4th of July. He came over and he was drinking, so he was feeling a little bit talkative. And he told her, he said that he was sitting, putting in a piece of it was tongue and groove flooring with adhesive. And he was putting in a piece of it, and with a mallet and a trowel and a block. And he reached for his tools and they were gone. And he thought that maybe he had rolled over them, and he looked over by the door and he could see them parallel, lined up in front of the door. And of course, this kind of spooked him because he thought, wait a minute, I didn't do that. He's broken out in goosebumps. So then he thought that maybe I had come back and I was playing a joke, that I picked up the tools and moved them to the door. So he got up, picked up the tools, called for me out in the hallway. Of course, I wasn't there. Turned on the light, turned on a battery-operated radio, and sat back down. And as soon as he sat back down and started putting in another piece, the light shuts itself off, the radio turns itself off, and he can hear the tools scooting behind him, and they lined up in that same spot. And he said that he couldn't get out of there fast enough. So this house was very, very active. I did, in the second book, find out from the family who I tracked down after I sold the house, because the people that I sold it to, and just for anybody that wants to say that I shouldn't have sold it to somebody without telling them, I did try to tell them. My conscience got the best of me when the new owner's wife was actually pushed by one of the demons on the stairs, and she was accusing her husband, who was 3 steps back. So when they came out, I asked them, I said, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And they said, "No, we don't talk about that. We don't entertain that. We're Baptists and we're protected." And I'm like, okay, I would have told them the truth. Mm-hmm. And as a single mother, I couldn't afford to pay for 2 homes. I would have preferred to burn it to the ground. So I did try to tell them. But in the second book, Omnipresent, What Happened Next, it starts off with the last chapter first, where I drive past the house 6 months later, and it turns out that the house is now up for sale with a for sale by owner sign in front of it. So they couldn't stay either. And the house had been sold so many times over a 7-year period, with like a 2-year gap where it was bank owned because the people, just moved and left it, that I mean, they didn't even know for sure how old the roof was on the house. So I talk about how I drove past the house, and the house was then up for sale. And I felt bad in that moment. I was hoping that some of the blessings and the things that I had done would have maybe had a delayed reaction, or maybe the people wouldn't be as sensitive as I was. And it just, it broke my heart. And as I was passing by the house coming off of the street, my radio turned itself on and started blaring, and I couldn't get it to shut off. I left skid marks getting off of that street. I did not want those people to come out and see me and invite me in, because I was not going in. But it was like a calling card, that the demons were letting me know that they were still there, and they knew that I was there, and I wouldn't go back. I had Discovery Channel want to do a segment on the story, but they wanted to do it at the house, and I'm like, no, you couldn't pay me enough to go back there, so it didn't happen. But moving forward with the second book, I did talk to the family. I did find out that their children were also being attacked. The mother was telling me that the children, one was like 4, and they were little kids, like 4 and 6, and they were in kindergarten, first grade, and pre-K. And at school, they would draw pictures, and they would bring them home of their house and family, like they always have you do. And then off to the side would be these 3 other figures. And when the children were asked what the 3 other creepy figures with the teeth and stuff, they said, those are the monsters that live downstairs in our house. So these kids were being attacked by that. And that is also in the book. The book also talks about mental illness and addiction, and the parts of it where people do have attachments, and sometimes schizophrenia, for example, maybe misdiagnosed because the people really are hearing voices because they have an attachment on them. So, and they really don't have a medical, they kind of blanketed over some of the disorders that there are, but they don't really have a factual, like, chemical imbalance or something for schizophrenia, but they go ahead and they blanket it and medicate it as if, they were medicating some of the other ones as well. And so I talk about that. I talk about addiction in the sense that there are also souls that do not cross over. And a lot of times people with addiction, they don't realize that when they're sitting there having their drink at the bar, or they're having their cigarette break, how many dead souls are standing around them just trying to get a whiff of the fumes? Because when you pass away, whether you've crossed over, which you don't have to cross over, you can choose to cross over or not. And if you choose not to, you usually end up as a ghost wandering, and those are the ones that are haunting people's houses, or you can cross over. But those are usually the souls that are, a lot of times they're based here because they've had addiction issues, and they're around sniffing the person's drinks and smelling the cigarettes. So there's some pretty gruesome things. And also in the peep show, if you think you're alone and having that private moment in the peep show,
oh boy,
you may not be. You might want to charge.
Yeah, you hear that, Sonny? Make sure, just because you're checking for cameras doesn't mean somebody's not watching.
Yeah, you may want to charge admission for what you're doing in there, because you've got a whole fan club with you. And
whoa.
Whoa, man! If it's not for the remote viewers and the spirit, it's like you can't be alone.
No, you're not. And the funny thing is there was a spirit in the facility that I was working for, and this is in the last book, and I call him Dapper Dan, as an example of a soul that has chosen not to cross over. And I'll share that story with you. I had a patient that was actively passing. I was with my med card in front of her room, and I see this spirit peeking around this pillar in the sitting area. And I'm like, hi, why haven't you crossed over? And the guy's kind of looking over his shoulder because, nobody's even acknowledged him probably in a century. So, he's looking, and I said, no, you there. I said, why haven't you crossed over? So he kind of comes towards me, and I had said to him, I said, look, if you want to cross over, I can help you do it. This lady's getting ready to pass. Her loved ones have come to collect her. And not that you have to go with her people, but why are you still here? And of course, he was a handsome man, and he had this very, very heavy Irish brogue, and he had a Swiss cheese area to his abdomen, which to me, when I see them that way, it indicates that he's not crossed over, but he's passed away from a corrosive type disease like cancer or maybe cirrhosis of the liver. When they cross over, that cause of death does not show, like the guy with no head, at the bar sniffing your drink. The head is then reattached if they cross over. So he said to me, "Milady, I can't cross over." I said, "Oh, why not?" "Sure you can." He says, "Because my wife and my mistress are on the other side and neither one knew about the other." So here this man had chosen to stay earthbound as a spirit because he didn't want to cross over and have to face his wife and his mistress who he didn't think knew that they were cheating. Mm-hmm. So, there are different things that they do stay earthbound for. Sometimes they'll be watching over a loved one and they assume that person's going to cross first and then they end up crossing, the caretaker does. So they kind of linger, or for a pet and things like that. And then they kind of get stuck here. So, people, they do have the choice to cross over or not. They still keep all of their senses, so they're able to smell and hear you. And the same thing on the other side, they do keep all of their senses. But I did write a book, my newest release, which I'm excited about, which is not the creepy stuff. It's actually the beautiful side of paranormal. It's called Colors of Heaven, Beginnings Never End. And I wrote this book because of being a nurse for 37 years, 17 years of which have been in end-of-life care, and helping people cross over at their time of transitioning. I'm able to see what's the workings on the side of the spirit side as well as the physical side of the person transitioning. And I saw my mother leave her body when she passed away, and something very beautiful happened. And I thought, if people could just hear this and help to take the stigma of death and dying away, I would love, I wanted to write the book for that reason. So I did. The thing about people, there are three kinds of death. There's a natural death, sudden death, and near-death experience, and they're all handled differently. Most people have a natural death, which is a gradual decline. And which was my mother. That's the way that hers was. And a lot of times too, before the body actually stops breathing, the soul will leave ahead of time, or they'll choose to stay in until the last minute. And my mother chose to stay in until the last minute. And I know this because she was still responding, even though her eyes were not open, she wasn't able to verbalize anymore, but her eyebrows would go up and down and she would try to mouth words. And it was appropriate. So when people would come in the room and they would say, "Hi, Phyllis," she would respond in that way appropriately. And I was telling a story that she didn't like and she was grimacing during that. So I knew she was still there, but I was sitting alone in the room with her and there was a misting that started to occur on the other side of the bed, wall to wall, floor to ceiling. I've learned since that's called ectoplasm. It is a portal, which I've seen in the house that was haunted that I wrote about in my first book, Omnipresent, as well as that misting that I saw with my brother's friend, John. But it started to fill up and I could see movement on the other side. Occasionally I'd see a pant leg stick out or a shoulder. And yes, they do show up in clothes. Nobody wants to see mom naked. So they do present, with clothing on. And it started to efface towards the head of my mother's bed. And I saw my grandmother, my mother's mother, walk in, and she looked the exact same as I remember her. She even had her little tight curly perm. She even presented with the eyeglasses that she normally wore. And she walked over to my mother's bed and started to stroke the inside of my mother's arm and would lean forward and whisper something or to say something to my mother. When people are transitioning, they have the filters efface and they have the ability to hear the spiritual side as well as the physical side. So when my grandmother was leaning forward and talking in my mother's ear, when she would pull away, my mother was doing the eyebrow and mouthing thing. And then she would lean forward again and my mother would do it again. This happened 3 times. I see this frantic wave behind my mother, which was my beautiful sister that was murdered by a jealous boyfriend when she had just turned 20. And I could smell her perfume. Her perfume filled the room. And she came around from the misting. I actually felt her embrace me. I could feel her long, beautiful hair falling over my face and her essence. And she looked the exact same too. I could actually see her in the pink dress that she was buried in. But the way that I do see spirits is I can see them as clear as I can see you out of my peripheral vision. However, when I'm looking directly at spirits, I see them better at a distance. When they start to get closer, I can see like a bottom half or like a side, but usually I see like this waffling to the air, like gas fumes or vapors off of a hot road is what they look like to me. And my mother, and I'll share this part with you because it's very, very special. So when my sister went back around the room, the whole wall had effaced and I could see into the other side. And I mean, there are colors there that we do not have here. We would need multiple color wheels. And it's not just the colors you connect with. So it's like their essence when you connect with them. It's almost like living colors, if that could even make sense. So, and I was looking over there and the people are all like gathering, getting ready for this reception. I noticed that there was a table under a tree with a cloth on it with no food. And I remember thinking, well, you're having a reception, but of course they don't eat. And the light seemed to emit from within the atmosphere itself. There was not a light source at all. And I turned to my mom and I said to her, I said, Mom, Robin and Grandma are here to take you home. It's time for you to go. And she mouthed an acknowledgement. I gave her a kiss. And she took her last breath within 10 minutes. But the thing that was interesting was at the head of her bed, I'm watching and I see this group of spirits that were like in a football huddle, only layered one on top of the other. And when they opened up, my mother's spirit was standing in the center like they were trying to stabilize her spiritual feet. And she is beaming from ear to ear. There are people that are coming up to greet her. There were hundreds of people there. There were beautiful angels there. There were spirits that were very, very tall that looked to be the level of angels that didn't have wings. And we have to keep in mind, that there are spirits there from other places because we're not the only solar system that there is out there. And as they say, energy cannot be created or destroyed. So regardless of the spirit crossing over, they've got to go somewhere. So it might be somebody from a different time zone or dimension that's also there. But there were these beautiful, very, very tall beings with white illuminating hair that were also there. And one by one, they were approaching my mother. And some of them I recognized from this lifetime, a couple of uncles and some cousins that had passed away. And of course, my grandmother and sister, and some of the people I didn't recognize, but my mother did, that were coming up to greet her. And I'm kind of trying to go a little bit fast so that I can get some, a lot of the information in there. But
Doing fine.
Yeah, good. But the feeling of the elation that came from that other side, words cannot touch it. There is no feeling words can't describe it. There's no feeling that can touch it. That feeling, you just can't help but sit there and smile. So I'm sitting there grinning from ear to ear, and I look over at my mom, and she has stopped breathing. And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, my mother's passed away, but she's not dead to me because I can see her right there. She's very much alive. But what is the nurse going to think if I'm sitting here, my mother's just died, and I'm grinning from ear to ear? Maybe I didn't think that I put a pillow over her head or something. So I went ahead and I called the nurse, and the nurse walked through the festivities. This went on for like 20 minutes of the beings still in the room. And she pronounced my mother dead. And I went ahead and I asked if I could stay in the room because I wanted to see what else was going to happen. And so I'm watching this, and the room starts to thin out as one by one, they come to approach my mom, and my mom is so happy. And it's like, I wanted just for that moment myself to go in for that party and then come back out because, it just was so very, very beautiful, the reception that she did get. And the thing about people when they are crossing that I have found professionally is that a lot of times before they come to that time, they start talking about seeing loved ones that have crossed over. And a lot of times these are mistaken for hallucinations. And also a lot of them know when their time is coming because they'll talk about it. My mother, the day before she passed away, she went around and told everybody goodbye, and even told this one lady who had her dog put down 3 days before that she would watch her dog for her until she crossed over. So because she said she was going home, tomorrow, and she did in fact go. So
yeah, I've heard of that actually, where there's a lot of people that'll be laying, excuse me, in the hospital bed or something, and they'll start talking to loved ones that have passed that are in the room with them. And yeah, like you said, people do think that they're hallucinating or something. They're just getting to that point where they're not thinking right. But I tend to believe that they're really in the room with them and they're really talking to them and just like getting ready to transition over.
And we've had one of our fans come in and tell us goodbye in the chat room.
Oh yeah, we had.
He was going to pass away that night, and he did, and it was sad.
It was rough.
I mean, it's shocking, but it was horribly sad because he'd been a friend for a while on here.
Well, and you will see him again. He's on vacation. He will be there to greet this. That's not the last time that you saw him. And that's another thing too, when people look at their loved ones and their pets do cross over. So they're there waiting for you. This is not the last time that you're going to see them. You will see them again. And it is, they do know that, but sometimes with the part with the hallucinations that are assumed, I had a patient that was actively passing. She was blind. She was totally blind, had been blind for 10 years, hadn't seen not even shadows. And her son and daughter come up to the nurse's station and they say, "Mom's talking to people in the room that aren't there." So I said, okay. I said, well, let me walk down to the room with you and I'll check on her and see if there's something that I can do to make her more comfortable. And so I walked down and she's laying there at a slant and she's reaching up into the air like she's taking something so delicate like snowflakes or something very fragile. And she is grinning from ear to ear. And I said, "Edna, who's here?" And she said, "George." Well, her daughter had to sit down because she turned as white as a sheet. And she said, George is my father. My father's been dead for X amount of years. And that's my dad. And then Edna speaks up and she says, "And he's glad that you're taking good care of Pixie." Well, Pixie was her poodle. When Edna's husband passed away, the dog had to be taken by the son because Edna couldn't care for the dog being blind. And the son speaks up and he says, "Well, I have Pixie. They explained the story to me. I have Pixie. She was still very much alive. She was probably like 14 or 15 years old, but she was still living." And he said, "Do you think my mom's hallucinating?" And of course, I can't come out and say, no, the spirits do come in to help the loved ones cross over. I handed it back and I said, "Well, do you think that your mom is hallucinating?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know." And I said, "Well, let me try something." I said, "I'm not trying to change your belief system." I said, "But there's a lot that you can learn from a person who's dying if you're open to that." And I said, "So let me just try something." And I asked Edna, I said, "Edna, can I ask George a question?" And she nodded yes. And I said, "What color is your son's shirt?" Now keep in mind, she's totally blind. And she said, "Yellow." He had on a yellow Ralph Lauren polo shirt. And he immediately got it. He said, "Hi, Dad." He then acknowledged the fact that the father was really in the room. And I told them, this is normal.
Took advantage of that long distance call.
That's so cool.
Yeah, exactly. People, you could learn so much from someone that is transitioning because they have the ability to hear the other side. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody say, "I just wish I could tell somebody that I love them one more time," or tell somebody that I'm sorry, or ask Uncle Bob, what he did with the clock. This is your chance. It is. This is your chance. And you can tell it through the person transitioning. They can respond and tell you it's in the bathroom on the floor, bottom shelf on the floor in the corner or whatever, and get your answer. And people miss this period of time because they're grieving so much that they don't take or maybe they don't know that you have that opportunity. But I have another lady, if I can share this story that also brings it home.
I just
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
just before that, I just had this one question. There's a lot of people that don't believe in the afterlife, and a lot of people that don't believe in, any of the stuff that we talk about for the most part. Do they ever get to that point where they're about to cross over and it shocks them that they're seeing stuff? Like, because it sounded like she was very comfortable with it. Like, oh, George is right here. Everything's cool. But are there other people that are like, something's happening? I can see stuff that I haven't normally been able to see.
When that comes closer to the time of death, people have asked, is it painful? Have you ever seen an awful death? Usually the person has had that acceptance and they're in part of that glow of the love from the other side. So, I'm sorry, ask me your question again. I apologize. I was kind of getting off on a tangent there.
Oh, it was like the people that don't believe in this stuff, do they ever get to that point where they're about to transition over and it hits them that they can all of a sudden see stuff in the room that they haven't been able to, and it's like, whoa, this stuff is real? Like before they cross over, they all of a sudden become a believer?
Yeah, well, they do see people. A lot of times they won't talk about it, or they might say something, or all of a sudden you'll see them sit up and they'll be pointing at something versus, talking about it. But they do see them, and sometimes they see them as early as maybe even a year before death. I had a patient that I call Abigail in my book. She was a woman that came to the facility that I was working for with the 3 levels of care. I was in the skilled unit, but she came for her husband, whose health was declining. And it just so happened that Abigail slipped and fell and fractured her hip. And so she was on my unit. We built up a rapport. And one day I came on shift and she was upset. And I said, Abigail, what's the matter? And she says, do you think I'm crazy? And of course I was teasing her. I said, define crazy, because we had built up that rapport. And she said, no, do you think I'm crazy? And I said, well, no, why would you even say that? And she said, well, I see my parents. She said, and I know that they both died a long time ago, but now they're getting ready to put me on medication for hallucinations. And I don't want to, take the medication because I see my parents and it makes me happy. And I told her, I said, well, first of all, I heard that you're going to be discharged tomorrow morning. And as your advocate, you have the right to refuse. You do not have, if you're of sound mind and your power of attorney is in agreement with you, you do not, those medications cannot be forced on you. So she was happy with that and she goes home. And about 6 months later, she's back on my unit. Her health is declining. And in addition to seeing her parents, she's now seeing a woman and a little girl. And she was sneaking food and cookies from the dining room to her room to give to the little girl. And of course, this was creating a bug problem and we had to stop her from doing that. But there was one particular day that I volunteered to work a day shift for a friend of mine that needed the day off. And I was on the unit. Normally I worked the night shift. And so, it was a first for me. And I'm going down the hallway and on my left-hand side, I pass Abigail's room. And Abigail was sitting there in her recliner, leaning forward with a piece of yellow butterscotch wrapped candy. And there was a little girl and a woman standing right there in front of her. And she was trying to hand the candy to the little girl. And I thought, oh, wow, Abigail's got visitors today. I'm so glad for her. But then I started to think, wait a minute. I don't remember those people signing in at the nurse's station. And we have to have a head count legally. So if there's an emergency, the fire department knows how many souls are in the building that they need to get out. And so I backed up and I knocked on the door frame and I walked into, she invited me into the room and I walked into the room and she's still sitting there with this butterscotch candy and there's nothing there. But yet I can see the wavering to the air. So I knew the spirits were still present in the room with her. And she said to me, she said, I want to introduce you to my friends. Isn't the little girl beautiful? And I said, yes, she is. Well, Abigail flew forward in her chair and she said, can you see them? And I said, yes. And she said, don't tell anybody. They'll think you're crazy and start you on medicine. So here this woman had the wherewithal to understand. Here she was on now all of this medication for hallucination. She was still seeing her parents and the lady with the little girl. And and she was enjoying that. And the thing is about a month and a half later, she was in an active decline. She was actually transitioning. And I came into her room and I was stroking her forearm and I said, "Hi, Miss Abigail, it's Lynn. I'm here to check your blood pressure." And when they do the transitioning, they their eyes kind of glaze over, their toes are more flaccid. When they come back into body, their eyes will brighten and their toes will perk. And sometimes they'll even talk about things that they've seen on the other side because they're testing the dimensions. They might even talk about seeing children that haven't come in, which has happened multiple times. But she was in that, we call it rallying in the medical field, and she was rallying and her eyes brightened up and she said, "I am so glad that I get to see you one more time." And she said, "I'm going home tomorrow. My parents are coming to get me and I'm going home tomorrow with my parents." And of course I knew what that meant. And I said to her, "Oh, you precious lady, you have a good trip home with your parents. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of your medical health care team." And she interrupted me and she said, "And I want to tell you something." And to this day, I cry thinking of this. She said, "You're very much loved on the other side." And she said, "And you need to keep doing what you're doing." And like I said, it brings tears to my eyes. And I told her, I kissed her cheek and I said, "We will see each other again." And she said, "We most certainly will."
Oh, that's awesome.
And the next day at around 10:30, I was not working, but I could feel her. And she's like, "I made it home." And sure enough, she passed away at 10:30 at night. The next night, she went home with her parents. So they do see these things. And hey, Ann. Hi, Ann. Hello. This is my spiritual sister here.
Oh, awesome.
So they've heard they've heard my stories a lot because we all, support each other. Be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe, everybody, if you haven't already. But it just, so many beautiful things. And I have so many stories. I have a funny story too about a lady that was in the room with me and her mother was actively passing. And the lady says to her daughter, now her daughter is an only child. So the mother says to her, she says, "There's a little boy here calling me grandma." And Susan turns and she says, "Well, I'm an only child and I'm not married and I don't have a boyfriend and I'm going through menopause. So I don't know why you'd have a little boy in here calling you grandma." And she says, "Yes, there is a little boy in here calling me grandma and he looks like you." And she kind of chuckled and let it go. Well, lo and behold, she did meet a gentleman in our break room whose wife had passed away. They built up a rapport and just supported each other for over a year. And he finally asked her out. They ended up getting married. Now, Susan's like 50, 51 years old at this point. And she starts feeling funny, goes to the doctor. And of course, the last thing on her mind is that she could be pregnant. And she was pregnant. And she ended up having a healthy little boy. And I've seen people, come back in with their kids because at that age, you have lots of relatives that would go through a facility like mine. Had another woman with identical twins. The same thing happened with little girls. The aunt actually was saying, "When are you going to have those babies? I want to see those babies before I go home to Jesus." And she's like, "Well, I've never been able to have children. We've been trying for 25 years and I'm in menopause." She was like 40, 46 years old. 45 or 46 years old. And she said, "That's wonderful." She says, "No, they have little ringlet curls and chocolate brown eyes and dimples, just like you." And she said, "Well, that's a nice thought, but it's not going to happen." Well, lo and behold, 6 months later, I see her and she walks in with a baby bump. And sure enough, it was identical twin little girls. And I got to see them as babies because then her uncle came through and her father and another relative. So I got to see them when they were toddling. I got to see them when they were about 5 years old. And they had blonde curly hair and chocolate brown eyes and dimples, just the way that the lady had described them in the room that I'm overhearing. So there are a lot of things that they see when they cross over. And again, you can learn so much from a person that is actively passing if you can get past the stigma and the fear of them crossing over. This is not the last time you're going to see them. We don't die.
I have a question.
Yes.
First of all, I love it when you say chocolate brown eyes. Thank you for that. That is beautiful, the way to describe brown eyes. So Lynn, we don't just talk about spirit and UFOs and aliens and stuff on this wacky channel, but we do talk about these things. And some of the people that right now in the community of UFOs, they talk about these things called, and it's become common to call them orbs. And I wonder what you think about when people are seeing some of these orbs, do you think that they're seeing UFOs, or do you think that they're seeing spirit? I do have a picture of one. I just wanted to share it and kind of get your opinion on it.
And just to let you know, while you're pulling that picture up, in the book, it explains how the two do in fact combine. There is a galactic element to it. There is a spiritual element to it.
So in your opinion,
that is a star seed.
Star seed?
That is a star seed. A star seed is a form of alien being, but they're not really like the typical alien with the big head and eyes. They're beautiful. They're healers. If you look inside of that orb close, and I have one to share with you also, one that I actually saw with my own eyes. So they can't say that it's a camera thing. I ran and got my camera as I saw it lowering, and you can see the wings and the head and everything. And these beings, they do have wings it'll land to the ground, but they don't, when they fly, their wings don't flutter. They just kind of propel up and down. But they are very, very gentle beings, and they come for healing. And the thing is when they approached me and my sister was going through cancer. And I really feel that spirit being came forward to help heal. I believe that some orbs are dust. Some of them are spirits. I've got pictures of them with inverted heads, with eyes and a mouth and nose and hair that you can actually see on them. Some of them, like I said, are dust. Some of them are not. The more milky, solid ones, especially in the dark. I mean, how can something reflect like that? So there is, and that's why I mentioned too, when my mother crossed over, that there was that one very, very tall being that appeared like on the level of an angel, but yet didn't have wings, a very beautiful being. I mean, he was so tall, and I'm saying I don't know if it was male or female, it was just gorgeous, regardless of what it was. But its head was almost skimming on the ceiling, and it had a beautiful energy about it. And that's why I say there are other solar systems. And we all do go through certain types of transition, depending on where we come from. Like we're coming from Earth. Earth is the hardest planet. Yes. I would love to be able to zoom in on those, because a lot of times you can see the actual spirit. I've got some I can share with you where I've actually seen the orb start to dissolve around the being, and you can clearly see the being inside of that. Those are not air bubbles. Those are not dust bubbles. So
I've seen, man, I still don't like telling this story, but okay, I seen something like that in my house, and it wasn't just me. I pointed it out to my son-in-law, and my wife seen it. I thought it was a bubble, but it wasn't moving. I would say like a bubble that I always say was stuck in a spider web. So it was just behind our couch in one spot, it wasn't floating around. So I see this thing, and I tell my son-in-law, "Hey, do you see this?" Because he's in the kitchen. So I think he's like doing dishes or something. I think that it's a bubble from the kitchen, and it floated all the way to the living room, and now it's just hanging there, and it hasn't popped, and it's the only bubble, So he turns around, and he's deboning a chicken, so he's got grease all over his hands, and he didn't have any water going, no soap, and nobody was taking a shower. So now I'm going, well, where the hell does bubble come from? And he doesn't see it. So he walks over to me, and I meet him about halfway, and we're about 2 feet away from it. And I pull him in close to me, and I go, "Do you see it right there?" And he goes, "Oh yeah." So then I go, "Watch, I'm going to pop it." And I tried to touch it, and I got about this far from it, and it shot straight up through the ceiling and disappeared. I want to say it popped, but it didn't pop. We all three watched this thing go through the ceiling, and then I kind of freaked out. He stayed calm, and he said that his mom told him that those were spirits, and they see them all the time in their house. He didn't panic at all. And I flipped out. Like, I had never seen anything like that before, ever. And to him, it was just normal.
And I have seen them too. So, but to validate what you're saying, I have seen them similarly as well. And I've seen them darting in and out of walls. And sometimes they leave like they're going so fast, it almost looks like a segmented ribbon behind them sometimes when they dart in and out of the ceilings. But
See, I didn't see that. I just 100%, I thought it was a bubble still, even though there was no soap going in the house. I still thought that was a bubble from somewhere until I tried to touch it, because it never moved. It never moved at all until I tried to touch it, and then it just took off. That's when I freaked out, because then it wasn't a bubble no more to me.
Nope, it wasn't. It was a spirit. I would next time say hello. They're not going to. These types of star seeds are not going to hurt you. They're not hurtful. They usually do come, for healing purposes. There are a lot of them, and actually, looking back in your picture, there's more than one, especially in this picture here. I see a couple, and I'm not talking about the ones that are more opaque and milky are the ones that I'm looking at, because sometimes you can actually see faces. Some of those are like kind of dust.
The bottom right,
I've seen orbs with multiple faces.
Yes.
In the same orb.
Wow. Yeah. Well, they can travel together. A lot of times they will split also.
I've also seen pets' faces.
Really? Now that I haven't seen, but I believe it. I mean, if a human can, go in his well, alien isn't really the word. They're very, very, they're beings from a higher dimension. And I don't like to put the stigma of alien on them, because they're beautiful beings that are they're just beautiful beings. So I can imagine.
I've never experienced anything like that until that day. And I bet that was about a year after I met Spooky, after he started doing the show. Could that have some, because Spooky does see orbs. He sees that stuff. And I don't. But could that have something to do with Spooky? Like, he sees them and we're good friends. And if he's thinking of me, how does that work? Like, why did that come here?
I think everything that we're gone through in the last year together, all of us as a community, is the opening of the mind, the expansion of consciousness.
I agree.
We are all opening our consciousness up, and we're opening our mind up to seeing things that we haven't seen before.
I absolutely agree. And also, with that being said, Sonny, you will start seeing them more often. And yes, it was because you were with Spooky. But the orbs knew that you were ready to see them, and you were going to start seeing them more often, just like all of you after talking to me. If you haven't already started seeing spirit in your peripheral vision, you're going to start seeing it, because you're going to notice that waffling in the air. You're going to notice that flash, and you're like, hey, wait a minute. Was that something? Don't doubt it. Yes, it is. And the more that you acknowledge it, the more that you will be able to see. And thank you so much, Spooky, for sharing that. Those are amazing pictures. And I totally back you up 1,000% that yes.
Yeah, this has been a fascinating conversation, Lynn. Thank you so much for being so open and willing to share so much. I can't wait to read one of your books now.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I've had a great time. And again, at www.linmoenay.com, Colors of Heaven is available in an ebook. The paperback books have not come out yet. They should be out around February, but if you are living in another country, it might be better for you to get the ebook, because the shipping is absolutely ridiculous on the books. So yes, please. And the Omnipresent is going to be a series of 5 books. The first 2 are out. I'm working on the 3rd. So excellent. Yeah, thank you.
Well, you are an excellent guest, Lynn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Lynn.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate being here. And thank you, everybody. I will send love and light to all of you. And you can reach me through my website. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We'll have you on again. Oh, and the Chop Shop, too. We have the Paranormal Chop Shop on Friday nights, so we'll have to book you on that if you're a night owl.
I am a night owl. When I go on Coast to Coast AM, because George Norrie's in he's actually in St. Louis, but it comes out of California. I'm used to having to be up in the middle of the night for those. So Yeah,
Excellent.
definitely. Yeah, let me know, and I'll get my beauty sleep ahead of time and make sure that I don't have any oatmeal dripping off my face when I get on camera. So.
No problem at all. Well, thank you so
All right,
much
then,
for taking the time with us this morning, Lynn.
Also, if you want to get George back, just tell him to join you on that night that you do the chop shop. Bring him with you, so he's got to stay up too.
Yeah, okay. Can do that. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you
so
very,
much,
very
Lynn.
much.
Thank you.
Well, take care.
Thank you.
Oh, that was awesome. Thank you, Sonny, for arranging that, bud.
It was my pleasure. That was awesome. She's a good guest.
Very cool. And thank you, everybody in the chat room, for being so engaging. You guys were awesome in the chat room. Appreciate everybody being here this morning. Mind Forked was very emotional, so we're going to have to link her up with Lynn for sure and see if we can get a
you made her
Chris
cry, man.
Yeah, a Chris and Lynn interview would be awesome. So yeah, thanks everybody for being here, and make sure to check us out tomorrow on the Paranormal Chop Shop. I think we're gonna have who are we gonna have on tomorrow?
Santa
Claus? We get Santa Claus booked?
I mean, or Rudolph, Frosty, one of them.
I think we're gonna have Sun Saver. I haven't heard from him, but I think we were talking about having him on for tomorrow. So hopefully we have Sun Saver on tomorrow. Yeah, Paranormal Chop Shop on YouTube, guys. Check us out tomorrow night at I'm not sure what time we're gonna be doing it because I don't have to work very late, so maybe we'll do it earlier. But we'll talk about that.
We'll let you set it up.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here, and make sure to check out linmonet.com for all of her books. Appreciate you being here. Love you guys.
That's right. Bye, y'all.
Peace.
It sound right, boys.